Bruce was really ahead of his time. I worked out with Bruce Lee, and I worked out for 3 years. Fight scene that everyone will remember called Return of the Dragon. And do the fight scene with me. Do I have to lose? He says, yeah. The guys you fight don't even have a chance. I mean, they don't even touch you. And he said, no, we'll make this a seesaw battle.
Sometime in 1972, Chuck Norris challenged Bruce Lee to a fight, and what happened next changed the story of martial arts forever. Sounds like a movie script. Join us as we break down the unforgettable encounter. Bruce Lee had just walked in after a long flight from Hong Kong. Chuck Norris was leaning against a wall, stretching, brushing the worn leather of his karate belt with his fingers. It was in the middle of a rehearsal. Chuck decided to throw a question into the room, a combination of a challenge and a test all at once. Everyone paused.
Bruce Lee in 1968, when I won the World Championship in New York City at Madison Square Garden.
Bruce did not hesitate, did not blink, did not even look around the way most people would. He just looked straight at Chuck, a slight smirk forming, and said, "Hit me." That simple statement sent ripples across the room. The people around them froze as if someone had pressed pause on the world. This was not just two men testing each other. This was two worlds colliding. A silent war between speed and strength, philosophy and power, practice and instinct. Mind you, the room where it was all happening was nothing fancy. It was a private dojo behind a studio. The wooden floors were laid under a thin layer of oil, and the air smelled faintly of old pine and sweat from countless previous fights. Only a few witnesses were allowed inside. Friends of both men, stunt performers who had worked on television shows like The Green Hornet and the Texas Rangers, and a handful of martial arts lovers sworn to secrecy. The tension was almost visible, hovering like smoke above the polished boards. Bruce and Chuck stepped onto the mat with the calmness of men who knew that every eye in the room was on them. They did not rush. They measured each other with eyes that had seen thousands of punches thrown and hundreds of rounds fought. What followed was a fight the like of which martial art lovers would never forget. Stay tuned, because the story is just about to begin. According to martial arts experts who reviewed the hidden footage of the match, Bruce Lee stood as if he were lost in thought. He was calculating the way Chuck would move, the way he had watched him in tournament footage and movies, memorizing the angle of his roundhouse kicks and the timing of his side steps. Chuck wasn't idle either. He was thinking about the power behind Bruce's fists and the lightning speed that made his movements almost impossible to follow with the naked eye. Friends and stunt performers were leaning forward, their hands clenching the edge of the benches they were sitting on, whispering among themselves. No one dared move too much. This was more than sparring. This was the testing of limits, the questioning of everything they had thought they knew about martial arts. Bruce moved first, slowly circling, his eyes never leaving Chuck, reading every twitch, every change in stance, every sign that might betray an opening. Chuck responded with a controlled kick, sharp but measured, the kind that would have ended ordinary sparring sessions immediately. Bruce barely moved. He was testing and gauging, and at the same time showing the confidence that made him legendary. It was not arrogance. It was knowing what he was capable of and daring the other man to find a weakness. Then the clash truly began. Bruce changed his stance, flowing smoothly from one position to another, absorbing and redirecting energy rather than meeting it head-on. Chuck pressed forward, his strikes coming faster now, heavier, guided by years of competition, each kick packed with the precision that had won him national titles. Their movements were so fast, so calculated, that it almost seemed like the room had slowed down just for them. Keep watching, because you'll never see this story elsewhere. Bruce intercepted a punch and countered in a subtle yet amazingly effective way. Chuck moved back slightly, nodding almost immediately. It dawned on him that this was not just another opponent. This was a master at work, someone whose understanding of martial arts went beyond mere technique. Every movement had meaning. Every pause had significance. The first exchange ended as quickly as it began, leaving the room in stunned silence. Sweat streamed down their foreheads, their breathing controlled, their eyes still locked. Everyone in the room understood, without saying it, that something extraordinary had just happened. Bruce had demonstrated speed that seemed impossible. In contrast, Chuck had demonstrated power that could not be ignored. The combination made it clear that what they had just witnessed would not be forgotten. Stories of it would spread quietly through the martial arts community, influencing how people thought about combat and training for years to come. There was no loud declaration of victory. There was no cheering, no dramatic fall. The The silence itself was the acknowledgement. Bruce and Chuck stepped back, hands slightly raised, eyes still sharp, a mutual understanding passing between them. Both men knew that this was more than a fight. It was a lesson, a test, and an inspiration all rolled into one. They had just witnessed what each other was capable of and respected it without saying a word. Even as they left the mat, brushing off sweat and adjusting their uniforms, the energy of the performance was all over the place. Bruce walked out with a quiet confidence, the kind that had already made him a teacher to so many in Hong Kong, and now would soon make him a legend in the United States. Chuck walked out with a renewed respect for speed, timing, and the unpredictable nature of a true martial artist. The studio returned to its usual sounds, lights, and smells, but nothing inside it felt ordinary anymore. The first strike had been exchanged, and something had changed between them. Something that would echo quietly but powerfully in every fight, in every training session, and in the way martial arts would be thought about from that day forward. The room had seen a collision of talent, philosophy, and human potential. What would come next was not yet visible, but everyone knew it would matter. It would matter for the way Bruce moved, the way Chuck struck, and the way the world remembered the moment when speed met strength and left everyone holding their breath. Stay with us, because the part you are about to witness is truly legendary. The next round started without much fanfare. No signal, no countdown, no nod. It simply happened. Bruce moved first once again, and it was so fast that several people in the room missed the opening motion entirely. To them, it looked like Chuck struck air while Bruce was already somewhere else. Those who had trained around Bruce before knew this was not luck or theatrics. This was the core of Jeet Kune Do in motion, interception before intention fully formed. Bruce was not reacting late. He was arriving early, cutting through intention before power could settle behind it. Chuck immediately answered with force. This was a man who had fought in hundreds of full-contact matches, a man who had won the professional middleweight karate champion title and held it for 6 straight years from 1968 to 1974. His body knew endurance. His muscles understood repetition. His strikes came clean, direct and heavy, the kind that rattled ribs and ended matches quickly. When Bruce slipped past one, another followed. Chuck did not chase. He advanced with patience, trusting structure, trusting training, trusting the habits that had never failed him in competition. They traded strikes, clean and sharp. Bruce's hands came in quick bursts, too fast for prediction, tapping nerves, brushing past defenses, never lingering. Chuck responded with force that demanded respect. When his strikes landed on guard or forearm, the sound echoed off the walls, a reminder that power did not need speed to announce itself. Bruce adjusted, not retreating, not rushing, simply choosing different angles, different timing, different answers. The air in the room felt charged. No one spoke. Even breathing sounded loud. Then came the moment that changed everything. Bruce stepped in and delivered a sidekick so precise that it halted Chuck's advance instantly, and it landed exactly where it needed to land, firm enough to create space, clean enough to make its point. A few people gasped before they realized they had done it. Chuck moved back, eyes wide, not from pain, but from recognition. This was not a trick, this was mastery. Bruce had used the simplest weapon at the perfect moment, not to dominate, but to demonstrate control. Something shifted in the room after that. The tension did not disappear, but it changed character. This was no longer about testing toughness. It was about understanding. Chuck adjusted his approach, not slowing down, but paying closer attention. His expression changed. The competitive fire was still there, but now it was joined by curiosity. He was studying Bruce the way a serious martial artist studies a teacher. Bruce noticed. He always noticed. That awareness guided his subsequent movements. In the middle of the exchange, Bruce eased the pace, just enough to reveal a lesson. He did not stop moving. He did not disengage. He simply showed how distance could be used as a weapon, how timing could neutralize strength without meeting it head-on. Chuck followed, learning in real time, adapting as the demonstration unfolded. This was rare. Two elite fighters rarely share understanding amid the intensity. Yet here it was, happening naturally without ego getting in the way. Then came the moment that would be whispered about later. Bruce stepped in and delivered a punch that landed perfectly. It was fast, accurate, and completely controlled. It stopped exactly where it needed to stop. No injury was recorded and no follow-through. It was all just proof. The room understood what had been shown. This was not about damage. This was about choice. Bruce could have done more. He chose not to. That choice carried weight far beyond the moment. Both men paused, not because they were tired, but because the point had been made. They stood facing each other, breathing steady, eyes clear. What passed between them did not need words. Chuck recognized that what he had encountered was not hype, not myth, not exaggeration. Bruce recognized that the strength and discipline in front of him were real and earned. The encounter had stripped away assumptions and left only truth. The people watching felt it too. These were not casual observers. Many had trained for decades. Some had worked on fight choreography for television and film. Others had competed nationally. They knew how rare this was. Two men at the top of their craft meeting without spectacle, without show, without ego, and walking away better for it. The silence that followed was deep, full, and almost respectful. As they stepped apart, there was no sense of ending. It felt more like a chapter closing while another waited to open. Bruce wiped sweat from his brow, calm as ever, already processing what he had seen and learned. Chuck adjusted his stance, nodding once, carrying new understanding with him. The room slowly exhaled. What had just happened would not stay contained within those walls. It would travel quietly through stories, through training rooms, through future fights and films. Something had been planted, and the impact was coming, and it would reach far beyond that small dojo. Stay with us because this story is not over yet. What happened in that quiet dojo did not stay there. It moved the way stories always do in Hollywood. Slowly at first, spread by people who knew when to talk and when to keep quiet. Stuntmen talked to other stunt performers. Trainers mentioned it to fighters they trusted. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody put names on record. The details stayed fuzzy, but the core remained steady. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris had tested each other in private, and something important had happened. Neither man ever stepped forward to confirm it. That silence only made the story stronger. In a town built on exaggeration, the lack of denial felt louder than any press release. Around that same time, Bruce's ideas were already spreading fast. Jeet Kune Do was no longer just a personal method taught to a few students in back rooms and garages. Word had traveled from Seattle to Oakland to Los Angeles. Fighters who trained in boxing, fencing, karate, and wrestling began to see something familiar in Bruce's approach. He encouraged them to drop rigid forms and focus on efficiency, timing, and honesty in movement. Enrollment at his schools increased, and his private students included names like Dan Inosanto, James Coburn, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. What made the difference now was credibility. Stories of that private encounter lent weight to Bruce's philosophy. People listened differently when they believed his ideas had held up against a champion. Chuck felt the impact too. He did not abandon karate. He refined it. He began paying closer attention to distance and entry. His training sessions became intense and focused. Friends noticed he spent more time analyzing movement and less time relying on raw force. In later years, Chuck spoke openly about respect for Bruce Lee's thinking, crediting him with expanding his understanding of combat. That influence showed up subtly in Chuck's later fighting style and even in his screen presence. His movements became cleaner, more deliberate, and less stiff than many fighters that era. Film felt the effects almost immediately. When Bruce stepped onto the set of Enter the Dragon in 1972, the choreography reflected everything he believed.
Enter the Dragon, the film that made Bruce Lee an international superstar, is returning to the big screen.
Fights were no longer slow exchanges designed for the camera. They were sharp, fast, and purposeful. Every strike looked like it belonged. The movie went on to earn over $90 million worldwide, an unheard-of number for a martial arts film at the time. It introduced martial arts lovers to a new standard of screen combat. Chuck's later films carried a different influence. He brought authenticity, discipline, and believable power to his roles. Together, their presence helped move martial arts cinema away from fantasy toward reality. Behind closed doors, stories continued to surface. Fighters talked about techniques they had never seen before, interceptions that stopped attacks before they formed, footwork that made opponents swing at space, control that allowed strikes to land without injury. These ideas did not come from books. They came from people who had seen Bruce move, who had trained with Chuck, or who had watched that rumored encounter from the edge of the room. Over time, these methods found their way into gyms, dojos, and boxing rings across the world. What had once seemed radical became normal. But that wasn't all, though. The idea of rivalry also took on a different life. This was not the loud, public kind built by promoters. It lived in whispers at tournaments and backstage conversations. Competitors spoke of Bruce and Chuck in the same breath, comparing styles, debating outcomes, and using both men as reference points for excellence. Their reputations grew together, not at each other's expense, but side by side. One represented speed, adaptability, and philosophy. The other represented strength, discipline, and endurance. Together, they became symbols of what martial arts could be when ego stayed out of the way. The impact stretched further than anyone expected. Students trained under Bruce's students. Fighters learned from Chuck's approach and passed it on. Championships were won by people who blended ideas from both worlds without even knowing where those ideas started. By the 1980s and 1990s, martial arts competitions looked different. Fighters moved differently. Training methods evolved. Even mixed-style competitions, which would later become mainstream, carried traces of that quiet meeting years earlier. Hollywood never let the story die. Directors and fight coordinators studied rumors the way scholars study old texts. They watched old footage of Bruce's training clips, analyzed Chuck's tournament fights, and tried to imagine what that encounter must have looked like. Elements of it appeared again and again in films, sometimes without credit, sometimes without awareness. The fast interception punch. The sudden stop made power useless. The pause showed control instead of aggression. These moments became part of the language of action cinema. Outside of film, the debate never really ended. Martial artists argued in magazines, at seminars, and later on internet forums. Some favored Bruce's fluidity and freedom. Others stood by Chuck's strength and structure. Both sides used the same story as proof, even though no official version existed. That uncertainty kept it alive. Every generation found its own meaning in it. Some saw it as a lesson in humility. Others saw it as proof that no single style had all the answers. Over time, one detail became symbolic. The moment Bruce invited the strike, that simple invitation became a metaphor repeated in training halls and locker rooms. It stood for confidence without noise and courage without show. It represented the idea that absolute mastery does not need protection or excuses. That moment blurred the line between fact and legend in a way that made it stronger, not weaker. Today, the story still circulates. It shows up in documentaries, late-night conversations, and quiet moments between teachers and students. It survives because it speaks to something fundamental and human. The need to test oneself honestly. The respect that comes from meeting a true equal. The understanding that progress often comes from moments no one else sees. What began as a private exchange became a shared inheritance. And as the echoes continue to travel, they hint at one final truth. Some moments do not belong to history books alone. They belong to anyone willing to listen closely and carry them forward. Thank you for staying with us. Are you for Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the next video on your screen to enjoy it.